Hi, everybody. Today we are going to talk about democracy. Now, we're also going to, one of the ways we're going to approach this today is we're going to talk about this in terms of what democracy is, but we're also going to talk about what democracy is not. And we're going to look at two other systems here, two other political sort of systems. So you've got democracy, authoritarianism, and totalitarianism. We're going to look at those three things today, and hopefully by the end of this, you can at least tell those three things apart. But another thing that I want you to do is I want you to think about which of these systems do I like best and why. And don't just fall back on the, you know, democracy is cool because democracy is cool. But do you really buy democracy, and why do you think it works better than other systems? Or if you don't, why doesn't it? That's what we want to talk about today. So we're going to watch some videos, look at some things like that. So you've already sort of done this not assignment, but you've sort of taken a second to write down how you would explain democracy to an alien. So let's see if we have a way to talk about this. Again, what is a good definition of democracy? There isn't really a great definition of democracy because, again, if you ask the ancient Greeks what they would have called democracy, it doesn't really look like what we call democracy today. So we want to talk about what we mean by democracy. Now, one of the things that we sort of think when we think democracy, probably the first thing we think is we think about how you pick your leaders. And we call this electoral democracy. In other words, we elect our leaders. That's how each individual gets a vote. Again, an egalitarian system. Each individual gets a vote, and then they get to use that vote to choose which policies or who's going to lead or things like that. That's what we call electoral democracy. And that's okay. We actually see a lot of electoral democracies around the world. In fact, most states in the world have some sort of elections. We're going to find just because you have an election doesn't mean you have electoral democracy. But hold off on that for a second. Electoral democracy, again, means rule by the people. The people get to decide. They get to elect what's going to happen. It's a system of government where citizens exercise their power by voting. But we want to add one more thing to this that's really important. Remember the talk they had in that video about the ancient Greeks. The ancient Greeks, they would send, again, the men with property would get to go and they'd get to vote. They wouldn't have all the men who had property got to go vote and weren't slaves. I guess it's not everybody, but you know what I'm saying? Like, essentially, if there's going to have a vote in Congress, there's going to be a vote in Congress here coming up, or they might have already had it by this point. They're going to say, we want to put $850 billion into the economy to combat coronavirus. Well, it's not me that they're asking. It's not you that they're asking. They're having a conversation at the Senate where there's these people that have been selected. I don't get to go onto my phone and vote yes or no for this. It's the representatives. We call this representative democracy. Now, for the most part, that's really all the kind of democracy we have in the world today, because a sort of true popular democracy where everybody gets to vote on everything is pretty impractical in the world. So what we do is we elect representatives who then exercise power on our behalf. Okay, so that's electoral democracy. That's very procedural. It says that if you have these things, you have a democracy. Now, here's the thing. That's usually not what we mean by democracy, because, for example, Saddam Hussein, when he was the dictator of Iraq, they had an election, and he won with 99% of the vote. That's pretty dang good. So why then would we not call that a democracy? Well, because there were some things missing, obviously. Even though they had an election, people voted, and 99% voted for Saddam Hussein. That's not exactly what we mean by democracy. So when we say democracy, we usually mean this version right here, a liberal democracy. Now remember our definition of liberal. Again, not the Nancy Pelosi style liberal, but the liberal which is, think about it for a second before I say it. What's liberal or liberalism? So each person gets to choose their own good life. How does that fit in with democracy? Well, we think about the things what allows you to choose your own good life. So when we talk about a liberal democracy, we mean all the things we had on that last page about electoral democracy. That's for sure on there. Plus The people have genuine choices. In that Iraq election I was talking about, where Saddam Hussein won 99% of the vote, he was the only guy on the ballot. In fact, there wasn't even a no vote. The 1% of that 99% are bad ballots. So essentially, he won because there wasn't a genuine choice. Now we're going to see something a little bit later here about China. China's going to let you elect the leader, but they're going to choose who you get to elect from, or the party's going to choose that for you. The election is free. What do we mean when we say free election? We don't mean, again, that you have to spend money or something like that. We mean that you get to make the choice, your own good life. Does that make sense? No one tells you what to vote. You get to choose. It's free. It's fair, meaning it's unbiased. It doesn't go in, we already know who's going to win before the thing starts. The people is determined by universal suffrage. So this probably should be a capital P. The people, like who gets to vote? If we're going to say rule by the people, who are the people? And the answer for us today is universal suffrage, meaning suffrage is who gets to vote. Universal, everybody. So everybody gets the vote. Now, again, there's limitations on that, right? If you're under, 18, you don't get to vote. If you're a felon, you don't get to vote. But for the most part, we mean universal suffrage. You can't just say the rich people, the white people, the males, only they get to vote. No, it's universal suffrage, or else it's not really a democracy like we talk about today. One more element we want to add to this is the people, again, this should probably be capitalized, the people, us, have rights to political participation, expression, and opposition. Rights are a real important part of this whole thing, is that we get to have a say in what's going on. If we say, I don't like Trump, for example, I don't get arrested for that. I can oppose the government. I have the freedom to participate, even if my participation is against the sitting government. So these all are what we sort of mean when we say liberal democracy. And without these things, if we just leave it at that, we know if without these things, we don't feel like we really have a democracy. Okay, so that's our starting point. We're going to come back to democracy later on on Thursday. But for now, that's that. Now you're going to watch two videos very quickly here. And they're going to be both videos about the Chinese political system. The first video you're going to watch is actually from the Chinese government. So they're going to have a pretty specific take on what their governmental system is like. And the second one is from a critic of that government. So compare those things as you watch them.